The System.io namespace in .NET provides a large set of objects that you can use for working with the file system and with data. There's the drive info object that provides information about a drive. Directory and directory info provide information about directories. There's file and file info, provide information about files. And the file system object lets us work with objects in the file system. The file stream object allows you random access to file data. The path object makes it simple to parse and work with paths to files. The path object doesn't actually represent a path of a particular file, just any path treated as a string, and it makes it easy to manipulate that path data. The stream reader and the stream writer allow you to read and write data stored in a file. These objects don't allow random access, therefore forward-only access to data within a file. This section will also demonstrate some of the dialogues involved with working with files, like the Open File dialog, the Save File dialog, and the Folder Browser dialog controls. To save typing in the code, I've imported the System.io namespace at the top of each file, so that I don't have to type System.io.directoryinfo or whatever else each time I work with one of these objects. That's why you'll see that I don't need to type the full namespace each time we work with each of these objects. We'll start by a discussion of selecting files from the file system. To do that, you can use the Open File dialog control on a Windows form, which is actually just a wrapper, a visual wrapper, around the Open File dialog class. If you drag one of these controls to a form, it appears in the tray area of the form. That is, it's invisible at design time and at runtime. So to use the Open File dialog, you'll place it on a form, set the appropriate properties either in code or in the Properties window. And by the way, if you use the Open File dialog class, not the control, you can only set its properties in code because there is no visual representation if you're just using the class directly. You call the showDialog method of the control or the class, and then retrieve the properties which indicate the selected file or files. Like I mentioned, you can also simply create an instance of the Open File dialog class in your code, but the designer and the control makes it easier to set the properties of the Open File dialog. The filter property allows you to specify a filter for files in the Open File dialog, and you add pairs of description and file specification values. You separate all the values with a vertical bar character. So you might end up with text like this. You set the Open File dialog.filter property equal to a set of strings separated with vertical bars. Text file star.txt, that's the description. Vertical bar star.txt, that's the file specification you're looking for. Then all files star.star, vertical bar, and star.star, the file specification you're looking for. We use vertical bars between each of the items in the filter. You can also set the filter index property, which is a one-based index for some reason, to the item within the list of filters to display by default. To show help and read-only controls, set the show help and show read-only properties. You can set the initial directory and restore directory properties to control the initial folder and whether you want to return to the original folder after selecting a file. There's a lot of other properties as well, and our example will show some of those properties in action. To show the dialog box, you call the showDialog method. This method returns a value which indicates which button you selected on the dialog box. The file name property then contains the selected value, and you can write code like this. If the showDialog method equals dialogresult.ok, then take the file name property of the Open File dialog and insert it into a text box or whatever else you want to do with that file name. If you want to work with multiple files, then you can set the multi-select property to be true. You'll get a file names property, which is an array of file names, and you can retrieve that array and do something with the contents of that array. You could even bind, say, a list box control to the file names property so you'll see the list of files in that list box. The control provides two events. There's the File OK event, which allows you to cancel the selection. We'll see an example of that. and the help request event, which allows you to display help. The help request event occurs if you're showing the help button and the user clicks the help button. You might think it would magically show you some help file, but believe me, it doesn't. You have to add your own code to display whatever help you want to provide to the user. The Save File dialog control and the corresponding class generally are equivalent to the Open File dialog. Many of the properties are the same, but it does offer some different options which are pertinent to saving files as opposed to opening files. For example, you can restrict overwriting capabilities, so you can make it so users can't select an existing file in the Save File dialog. There are a bunch of other dialog controls and corresponding classes as well, which we won't discuss here, including the font dialog, the color dialog, and more. Let's look at an example that demonstrates the Open File dialog control. I've loaded the sample project for this section named Input-Output, and in the Work with Path class, I've set a breakpoint on the code we'll run when we click the Browse button. If I look at this form in Design View, you'll see that I've also placed an instance of the Open File dialog control on the form. I didn't need to do that because I really won't use the Properties window to set any of its properties. I'll be doing it all in code. But if you intend to set properties at design time in the Properties window, using the control from the toolbox is the easiest way to do it. If you're going to set properties in code like I'm going to, it might be easier just to create an instance of the Open File dialog class. But in any case, let's click Browse. This should take us to our code, and now we can single step through it. We start by setting the filter property of the Open File dialog to be these three sets of strings, separated with vertical bars. We'll see 3 items in the drop-down list that lets us select the filter. We're also setting a bunch of other properties, and most of these are actually the default values for these properties, so my setting them doesn't really make any difference. I just wanted to show you the kinds of things you could set. For example, there's the Add Extension property, which says whether the dialog should add the default extension if you don't specify the extension. TXT is what we'll get. There's a Check File Exist and Check Path Exist property to verify that the file and path exist if I type my own file name. You can specify a filter index, which is 1-based for historical reasons. So if I've selected 3, all files will be the default filter. I can specify the initial directory, where to look. Multi-select is false, meaning we won't allow multiple selections. Read-only checked is true, which means that the read-only checkbox will be checked. And the restore directory property is false, meaning that once we're done, we won't go back to the original folder. We'll stay in the folder that contains the selected file. Show help and show read-only show the read-only checkbox and show the help button on the form. A couple other obscure properties down here, but the most important thing is I call the show dialog method and look at the result. If the result is OK, then I take the file name and place it into the path name text box. Now on this form, let's go back to the form design surface here. On this form, I've also hooked up some events. If we look at the events for this control, we'll find the file OK and the help request event. The file OK event runs once you click the OK button. This gives you a chance to do something between clicking OK and dismissing the dialog box. In my case, I'll ask, do you really want to open this file name? Kind of an irritating thing to do. And if they say no, I cancel the event which cancels closing the dialog box. In the help request event, this occurs when the user clicks the help button on the dialog box. You can do whatever you want. You'll need to display a help file or something. I'm just displaying an alert that says, hey, we got no help. So let's run this thing. If I press F5 to run full speed, here's our dialog box with our 3 items in the filter, and the third one is currently selected. I can choose something else to filter to a different set of files. I can choose one and click Open, and you see our File OK event handler run, which displays this irritating alert. If I say no, we cancel and we're right back where we left off. If I click Help, the help request event runs, and we can click OK to dismiss this useless dialog box. If I click Open once again and choose Yes, then the file name gets placed into this text box on our sample form. So now you've seen how to use the Open File dialog to select a file from the file system. Rather than selecting a file, you may need to select a folder. You can use the Folder Browser dialog control to allow users to select a folder, and you can optionally allow them to create new folders. This dialog box and its corresponding class have properties like the description. You can specify a description for your dialog box. The root folder, where you'd like it to root itself. Could be My Computer, could be Program Files, could be a number of different places. We'll look at that. The selected path is the path the user selected, and you can set this property as well to set the default selection in the dialog box. And there's the Show New Folder button property, which gets or sets a value indicating whether the Make New Folder button appears in the dialog box. To use this dialog, you can place an instance of the control on the form or just create an instance in code. You set properties of the control. You can set the selected path to set the initial folder. You call it Show Dialog method. Check the method's return value. It won't return to your code unless the user either selects a folder or cancels the dialog box. If it's not canceled, use the selected path property to retrieve the selected path. Let's try an example which shows off the behavior of the Folder Browser dialog control. In the sample application, I'll click the Folder Browser dialog button to display this form which allows us to test out the Folder Browser dialog. We can set the description property, of course, by typing something here. It'll show up as the description. I can check this to set the Show New Folder property, so it does allow you to create new folders. I can select the Start location. Here's a list of all the different places I could use as the root for the Folder Browser dialog. I'll choose, say, Program Files. And now if I test it, here's my breakpoint. And we'll set the description based on the text box. We'll set the root folder to be the value I've selected. We'll set the Show New Folder button to be the value I've entered, and the selected path to be the text of the results label on the dialog box. So if the form had already run once, that label would contain text, and the next time through, it would start at the same place we had already selected. Since this is our first time through, there won't be anything in there. Let's show the dialog. And here's our dialog rooted at Program Files, and I can select a folder. Let's say SDK, Compact Framework looks like a good place to go. I click OK, and now, since I clicked OK, if the string is null or empty, that is, the selected path is null or empty, that would indicate that I had picked a non-file system selection, like a printer or something. That's not the case in this example, so I take the selected path and I display it on the form. And here is the selected path that I chose. Let's try it once again just to prove a point, choosing, say, desktop. Try it again, and this time the same code runs. And it is rooted at the desktop this time, and the same folder is selected as the default. Back on my desktop, I can choose any folder I like, say this one, and there we see that folder here. So this dialog box gives you a lot of flexibility for selecting folders. You can choose where the user starts, and you can choose whether they're allowed to create new folders or not. Sometimes you just need to parse information about paths or retrieve general information about your file system. That's what the system.io.path class is for. The path class provides a number of shared or static methods, and they allow you to pass in a path or a file name, and the results include the parsed portions of the name. None of these methods require a real path. You can pass in whatever you like. It doesn't matter. They simply do their work on the string that they're sent. So this class, the path class, is extra special. You can use it to parse anything that looks or feels like a path, and it will get the information for you. It has nothing to do with the real file system. It's all about parsing text. or working with generalized information about your file system. Let's look at an example that demonstrates the use of this class. In my sample, I'll click the Path class button, bringing up this sample form. Just as before, we can browse for a file in the file system. I'll go find one. And you can see we've placed the name here. I could have just typed any path, because what I'm doing from now on has nothing to do with the fact that that represents a real file name. We're just dealing with parsing this text. If I click the button, we run code that fills in each of these labels here with information about this file name or the file system. The has extension property just returns true if there is an extension on whatever path we supplied. For example, if I try this without an extension, it doesn't have an extension. Let's try it again. Now remember, each of these is just a static or shared method or property. So you just say path.hasExtension or path.isRooted and supply the file name as a parameter. IsPathRooted means it has a root to it. It belongs directly to some drive or share. If I try this now, it's not rooted. I didn't say where the thing exists. The path.getDirectoryName method returns the directory portion of this file name here. The getExtension method, path.getExtension, passing in this string, returns just the extension part. The getFileName method returns the file name portion of the string, and the getFileName without extension method returns just the file name part without its extension. The getFullPath returns the full path back, and the reason that exists is so you could pass in a relative path name and get back a full path name. GetPathRoot returns just the rooted portion of the path, which is C:\/ in this case. Let's try this assuming it was a share. Let's try it that way. In that case, the path root is sharename/folder. That's the path root for a share name location for a file. Let's put it back the way it was for the rest of this discussion. Down here we have a number of methods which are applying to our file system. They're again methods of the path class. There's path.getTempFileName, takes no parameters, and it just returns the name of a file that it can use for temporary storage, and it creates the file at that point. So right now I have a file named tmpeb62.tmp in my temporary folder. I can call getTempPath to retrieve the path to temporary files. GetRandomFileName returns a random file name but doesn't actually create the file. It's generally pretty safe. The likelihood that that file name already exists somewhere is pretty small, but it doesn't create the file, so you could have an application that by some very, very small chance created that same file name somewhere, but it's very unlikely. There's also getInvalidPathCharacters, which returns characters that are invalid in the path name, and getInvalidFileNameCharacters, which returns characters which are invalid in file names. You could use those characters to determine if a file or path name were actually valid or not in the current operating system. So as you can see, the path class provides a number of general purpose methods that you can use for parsing paths and for getting information about your current file system.